A loyal man discovers the ultimate betrayal, his girlfriend and best friend in a web of lies. But as rage turns to calculation, his silence becomes their deadliest mistake. What begins as heartbreak slowly transforms into a chilling game of psychological revenge. I used to believe betrayal was something that only happened to careless people, those who ignored the warning signs, those who trusted too easily. I thought I was smarter than that. But let me tell you something. No matter how sharp you think you are, you can still bleed when the knife comes from behind. Her name was Emily. To me, she wasn't just a girlfriend. She was the blueprint of my future. Every plan, every dream had her shadow stitched into it. And then there was Ryan, my best friend since childhood. We'd been through everything together. Scraped knees, first heartbreaks, late night talks about becoming men who'd never let each other down. That's why what I found shattered not just my heart, but my entire sense of reality. It started small, a glance too long between them, laughter that didn't need a punchline, but love makes you blind, and friendship makes you stupid. Or I brushed it off. I told myself I was imagining things. That's what betrayal does. It whispers in your ear, but you smother it with denial because the truth is too ugly to face. The night I discovered the truth, it was almost cinematic. Emily told me she had plans with her sister. Ryan said he was working late. And yet I couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that something was off. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was my subconscious finally connecting the dots I refused to see. So I drove, not aimlessly. My gut guided me. Through the empty streets, rain tapping against the windshield like impatient fingers. I ended up outside Ryan's apartment, and there it was, her car, parked right in front. I should have left, should have walked away before the images branded themselves into my brain. But curiosity, when mixed with rage, is the cruelest poison. I climbed the staircase, my footsteps careful but heavy with dread. The door wasn't even locked. What I saw when I pushed it open, I swear it was like the air was sucked out of the room. Clothes scattered carelessly, her laugh echoing from the bedroom, his voice tangled with hers. The kind of intimacy that once belonged to me, now stolen in my oldest friend's bed. I didn't scream, didn't burst in. I stood frozen, gripping the doorknob until my knuckles burned white. And in that silence, something inside me cracked. Not just love, not just friendship, but every thread of trust that had held my life together. I walked away quietly, leaving them to their passion, their betrayal, their sin. My heart was no longer breaking. It was hardening. Every beat sounded like a hammer on steel. On the drive home, my reflection in the rearview mirror startled me. My eyes weren't mine anymore. They were darker, emptier. The eyes of someone who had just died and been reborn into something far colder. Most people would call a friend, cry, beg for answers. Not me. That night, I realized something. Revenge isn't born in fire. It's born in silence. I knew screaming wouldn't hurt them. Words wouldn't make them regret what they'd done. If I wanted them to feel the way I did in that moment, trapped, suffocated, betrayed beyond repair, then I needed to become patient, calculated. Emily and Ryan thought they had fooled me. They thought their little secret was safe in the dark. But the truth, that was the last night they'd ever know peace. Because from that moment on, my love was dead. My loyalty was dead. And in its place, something far more dangerous had taken root. Not rage, not grief, but a plan. The cruelest part about betrayal isn't in the moment you find out. It asks the days that follow, when you're forced to pretend the world is still the same. I woke up the next morning in a bed that suddenly felt colder, in a house that no longer felt like mine. Emily's perfume lingered on the sheets, sweet and poisonous, and every breath felt like swallowing glass. She texted me that day, "Good morning, love." The irony nearly made me laugh. Love? That word had become a mockery, a knife wrapped in velvet. I stared at my phone for a long time before typing back, "Good morning," nothing more. No suspicion, no anger, just calm. And that calm terrified even me. At work, I couldn't focus. My colleagues asked me if I was okay. I lied. Of course I lied. What was I supposed to say? That the two people I trusted most had gutted me alive while smiling in my face? No. Instead, I swallowed the truth like poison and let it burn me from the inside. But the suffering wasn't just emotional. It was physical. Nights became torture chambers. I'd lie awake, picturing them together, replaying every touch, every stolen glance I had once ignored. My chest felt heavy, like someone was sitting on it. My hands shook without warning. Food turned to ash in my mouth. And yet, I said nothing. Emily still came over, smiling, kissing me, playing her role like an actress in a cheap play. Sometimes I wondered if she knew I'd caught her. Her eyes didn't give her away. No guilt, no hesitation. That was the worst part. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was shameless. Ryan. He called me twice that week, asked if I wanted to grab a drink, like nothing had changed. Like the memory of his voice moaning my girlfriend's name wasn't seared into my skull. I agreed, because that's what a friend would do. I met him at a bar we used to go to as kids. Same old Ryan, laughing too loud, telling jokes, slapping my back like a brother. But I couldn't hear the words. I could only hear the lies beneath them. He raised a glass and said, "To loyalty." I almost choked. The word tasted rotten in my ears, but I clinked my glass against his and forced a smile. "To loyalty," I echoed. And inside, something in me whispered, "Not for long." The suffering deepened with every passing day. Not because of what they had done, but because of what I hadn't done. I held it all inside, and the silence gnawed at me, chewed holes in my sanity. Every fake kiss from Emily, every empty laugh from Ryan tightened the noose around my chest. I thought about exposing them, screaming the truth, throwing it all into the open, but that would have been too easy for them. They'd fight, deny, maybe even cry, and then what? They'd move on together, bonded by their shared sin. No, that wasn't enough. I didn't want to simply end them. I wanted them to feel what I felt, to taste betrayal on their own tongues, to lie awake at night with their own demons whispering in their ears. So I let them keep their little game, let them believe they were safe. All the while, I studied them, watched every glance, every text she tried to hide, every excuse he gave me. My pain was fuel, sharpening me. There's a strange thing about suffering. If you endure it long enough, it becomes a weapon, and I was learning to wield mine. Late at night, staring at the ceiling, I stopped thinking like a victim. I started thinking like a predator. There's only so much a person can endure before the cracks turn into fractures. I thought I could carry the secret, bury it deep, let time dull the blade. But betrayal doesn't fade. It festers. It poisons everything it touches until the weight becomes unbearable. That breaking point came one Friday night. Emily had asked to stay in, claiming she was exhausted from work. I knew better. Her eyes flickered when she said it, like a candle struggling to stay lit in the wind. She left my apartment around 8, promising she'd call me before bed. I waited 5 minutes before grabbing my keys. The streets were dark, quiet. I drove with the kind of focus you get in a storm, knowing the lightning will strike, waiting for it to pick where. My chest thudded with a rhythm that wasn't panic, wasn't fear. It was clarity. Ryan's apartment glowed faintly when I arrived. A single light in the living room, curtains half drawn. I parked down the street, far enough that they wouldn't notice. Then I waited. Minutes turned into an hour. Every second was gasoline on the fire burning inside me. And then, there she was, Emily, framed by the window, moving through his living room like she owned it. No hesitation, no shame. She poured herself a drink, curled up on his couch, and laughed at something he said. It wasn't the intimacy of bodies tangled in bed sheets that gutted me. It was the ease, the casual comfort of two people who thought they deserved each other, who thought the world would never catch them. I wanted to storm in, to rip the mask off, to scream, to end the charade right there. But rage is loud, and revenge is quiet. I forced myself to stay, to watch, to burn every detail into memory. That night, I realized my silence wasn't just a choice. It was a weapon. They thought I was blind. They thought they were clever. But the truth? I was gathering ammunition. Still, the suffering gnawed at me. The image of them together replayed endlessly. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. My co-workers noticed the shadows under my eyes, the weight falling off my body. Friends asked what was wrong. I brushed them off. But inside, something monstrous was growing. The final straw came 2 weeks later. Emily and I were at dinner, a cozy little place we'd gone to countless times before. She was laughing, telling me a story about her boss at work. Her hand reached across the table, brushing mine with the same affection she used to. And then, her phone lit up. Ryan's name. A single message. Last night was unforgettable. The blood drained from my face. Time slowed. She snatched the phone too quickly, shoved it into her bag, her smile faltering just for a second. But that second was enough. Everything inside me went still, cold. That was the breaking point. Not the night I saw them tangled in his sheets. Not the countless lies, the fake alibis, the stolen glances. It was that single moment at dinner, her hand on mine while his name glowed on her screen, that finally snapped the last thread of restraint. I didn't confront her, didn't cause a scene. I smiled. I laughed at her story. I paid the bill. But in my head, I was already rewriting the script. That night, as I lay beside her in bed, her back turned to me, I stared at the ceiling with a clarity I'd never known before. The suffering was done. The denial was done. It was time to move from silence to action. If betrayal was the knife they buried in me, then revenge would be the blade I learned to wield. world, and unlike them, I wouldn't miss. When the breaking point arrives, most people imagine a rush, a dramatic confrontation, a thrown glass, a shouted confession in the rain. They picture fury as flames. But revenge, the kind that lives past a headline, is patient. It is an architecture of small, precise cruelties built over time. That's what I set out to design. Not a collapse, but a slow, inevitable unraveling. The first rule I gave myself was simple. Never act until every variable was controlled. Emotions were a liability. Details were my currency. So I started collecting them like a miser collects coins. Quietly, methodically, without anyone noticing. Receipts, timestamps, stray messages, subtle patterns. I learned their rhythms. When Emily drank too much at parties, how Ryan left his apartment unlocked when he was tipsy, the small lies she favored whenever I asked about her weekends. These little truths were hooks. I kept them close. Surveillance became my homework. Not stalker theatrics, that's noisy and sloppy, but careful observation. I reinvented myself as a background presence. I watched their social media interactions, not with the heat of a jealous lover, but the clinical attention of an investigator. I logged call times, cross-referenced locations, saved photos, screenshot conversations when they let their guard down. Each artifact was a brick in the wall I intended to build around them. But information alone wouldn't break them. Information needed context, an audience, a catalyst. So I crafted scenarios designed to plant doubt and magnify their own insecurities. Humans are fragile under the right kind of pressure. The trick was to twist their safest places into traps. I started with small, believable lies that wouldn't alarm them, but would raise a hairline crack in their confidence. A missed text that I later found. A rumor gently seeded at a party. A casual mention to a mutual friend about hearing something. Nothing that would scream deception, only enough to nudge their world out of perfect alignment. Psychological warfare requires language and counterpoint. So I learned to weaponize ambiguity. I left messages half-sent, with just the right number of ellipses. I made sure Emily's friends saw Ryan in places he wouldn't normally be, and I subtly suggested to Ryan that Emily had been meeting someone else in odd hours. Paranoia, once sparked, feeds itself. It turns small suspicions into monstrous certainties. Watching two confident people begin to second-guess their choices is a kind of art. It is intimate, surgical, and devastating. I also needed allies, not loyalists, just useful people. I quietly positioned myself within the periphery of their lives. The barista who always noticed Ryan S. late-night purchases. The secretary who could accidentally confirm Emily's overtime. The mutual friends who liked to repeat gossip as if it were news. None of them knew they were being used. They thought they were helping, or simply sharing small truths. Humans volunteer confirmation when you hand it to them, wrapped like a harmless secret. Financial pressure came next. People tend to keep their money and their lovers in separate drawers, but both can be pried open with persistence. I didn't hit them where it would be obvious. A bank transfer or a public scandal, but at the edges. I researched small ways to complicate their lives. Late fees at Ryan's gym, a forgotten parking ticket for Emily that escalated, a sudden audit scare for a freelance project he'd been lax on. Each was minor in isolation, but in aggregate they build a narrative that life with each other was not the tidy escape they imagined, but an escalating series of irritants that eroded trust. There was also the intoxicating pleasure of rehearsals. I practiced conversations in the mirror, perfected the tone of innocent ignorance I'd adopt when the time came. I wrote alternate versions of what I would tell their friends, sometimes the loyal boyfriend, who was in denial, sometimes the concerned mate, who only wanted the truth. The performance had to be seamless. People believe the person they expect to believe. Most importantly, I learned to hide my heat. I smiled, I hugged, I made plans. They saw me as the grieving, romantic fool who still loved and forgave. That mask is the most lethal weapon you can have. It disarms suspicion. Emily would lean on me when she felt guilty. Ryan would confide in me when the weight of their deception pressed on him. I took their confessions and folded them into evidence. Each tear, each joke about the future, each bored conversation about things that no longer mattered, all became threads I could tug when the timing was perfect. I built a timeline. Not the kind that plotted vengeance in a rash calendar of violent days, but a detailed schedule where tiny acts accumulated into catastrophe. The plan required patience. A rumor dropped just before a big presentation of Ryan's a subtle social media post from an anonymous account before Emily attended her friend's wedding. A call to an old lover's number that they might see. Timing was everything. The crescendo had to feel inevitable, not orchestrated. And somewhere beneath the planning, beneath the cold calculations, my heart, or what remained of it, learned to to enjoy the clarity. The suffering that had once eaten at me became a tool I could shape. It was a dangerous realization. Pain could be converted into precision. But I never forgot why I started. This wasn't about hurting for the pleasure of it. It was about making them understand, finally, the depth of what they destroyed. The plan coalesced into something terrifyingly simple. Expose them not with violence, but with the slow devastation of truth that becomes public only when it's too late. Make their safe spaces uncomfortable. Make their allies uncertain. Make their future a place where daylight revealed the rot. When they finally questioned everything, it would be too late to find solid ground. I closed the notebook where I kept my logs and smiled without warmth. The scaffold was set. The pieces were in place. Now all that remained was to wait, to nudge, to let human frailty do the rest. When you finally pull the trigger in a story like this, people imagine fireworks, glass shattering, accusations hurled in a bar, lives rupturing in a single scene. That's cinema. My kind of cruelty lived in slow motion. First moves that felt like accidents, glitches in a world they believed to be flawless. I wanted their collapse to be a drip, patient and corrosive, until nothing solid remained. The first move was social, almost petty, and perfectly effective. I started with mutual friends, the people who'd been witnesses to our history, and who, if persuaded, could rewrite memory for an audience. I didn't slander them. I teased thin threads of doubt into conversations that felt intimate, not accusatory. Did Ryan tell you about that weekend? I would ask one friend, while letting my face fall into an expression of vague worry. To another, I'd say, Emily seemed distracted at the wedding, didn't she? I thought maybe she was stressed. Casual, harmless phrases. The goal wasn't to convince everyone at once, but to seed unease. Rumor, once germinated, begins to replicate without your hand. Next, I nudged their reputations. I made sure a few small, embarrassing incidents happened publicly. Ryan's carefully curated image, a reliable, confident guy, was vulnerable to small cracks. At a company event, I accidentally spilled a drink near him, then complimented his composure in front of colleagues. People noticed his flinch. At Emily E.S. Gallery opening, I left a low-volume voicemail hinting at a rumor I heard, then watched as guests' expressions shifted from polite interest to speculative amusement. These moments were tiny avalanches, hardly noticeable alone, but together they altered the landscape of how people saw them. I also attacked their private sanctuaries. Ryan prided himself on being meticulous, his apartment, his schedule, but even the most careful people leave openings. One evening, I borrowed an old hoodie of his that had been in my closet since college. I left it, deliberately, in a place where Emily would see it at the gym locker room they both used. The sight of that hoodie, out of context, prompted a whispered question to a mutual acquaintance. Why would he leave his hoodie there? The seed took root. Emotionally, the first moves were crueler, because they were insinuations rather than shouts. I started leaking half-truths to Emily I.'s inner circle, stories of a flirtatious late-night text she sent weeks ago, a rumor about Ryan being at a party during a time he'd said he was alone. People don't need proof to begin speculating. They need uncertainty. As their worlds filled with small, unresolved mysteries, their trust in each other began to require vigilant tending, an exhausting task when they had no idea who had set the garden on fire. At the same time, I tightened the noose around their daily lives. Not with overt sabotage, that would be obvious, but with inconveniences designed to erode confidence. I made a few subtle calls about a mistaken invoice to the freelance project Ryan was proud of. It took him hours to clear up. I misdirected an invitation meant for Emily so she arrived late to a luncheon, flustered. Little things that made them doubt their competence, their memory, their luck. Self-doubt, once seated, leaches into relationships because people start to look for the nearest scapegoat, often the person closest to them. I also used their privacy against them, but with a restraint that kept the story itself from collapsing into vindictiveness. I arranged for a mutual friend to find a suggestive text on Emily S. phone that, when shown to Ryan, looked like innocent banter, but smacked of intimacy. Ryan's jaw tightened. His voice lost its warmth. When friends described the scene later, they spoke of the shift as if a storm had passed, two islands that had suddenly begun to drift. Perhaps the most painful first move was emotional triangulation. I called Ryan, casually, friendly, and in that tone let slip my concern over how Emily seemed distant lately. He responded with irritation at a problem that didn't exist, which I then repeated to Emily in a worried tone about Ryan's stress. Both of them, trying to comfort me, reassured me in ways ways that revealed more than they intended. The result was a mirror held up to their relationship that reflected cracks neither had been willing to see. In the hours after those conversations, they both lay awake and dwelled on the other's oddities, wondering which small change signaled a larger betrayal. None of these moves were violent. None required force. They were psychological chisels, precise and patient. People destroy themselves more often than others destroy them. Given the right pressure, sustained and systematic, their own hands do the rest. That owes the terror of a slow burn. The victim becomes the instrument of their own undoing. Week by week, the friction intensified. Friends started taking sides, or at least hedging bets about who was right. Trust, once chipped, becomes a collection of jagged pieces that cut whoever tries to hold them together. Emily and Ryan began to argue about small things: schedules, money, forgotten plans. The fights were never about the affair anymore. They were about the erosion, the tiny betrayals that eat away at intimacy. And I watched it all as if from the dark side of a theater curtain, detached, clinical, filled with a strange sense of victory that felt hollow in the quiet moments. The first moves had worked. They'd cracked the armor without revealing the hand that struck. Now, with the foundation weakened, the next phases could be more visible, more devastating. The slow burn had become a wildfire contained only by how patient I chose to be. Everything I'd built, every scrap of evidence, every whispered doubt, every tiny corrosive maneuver led to this narrow corridor of time. The plan was never a single blast. It was a sequence, each act slotting into the next like gears. The climax wasn't about cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was about making them watch the life they'd just stolen from me disintegrate under the pressure I had become. I chose the night carefully. A charity gala where Ryan would present, a night when his ego would be on stage under warm lights, when colleagues and superiors would be present to witness his polish. It was perfect because it amplified spectacle. The higher his fall, the cleaner the lesson. Emily would be there too, ostensibly to support him. Their simultaneous presence guaranteed maximum exposure. I felt no triumph in that calculation, only a cold, clinical satisfaction. My job was to make truth unavoidable. The first move that evening was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who hadn't watched for months. I slipped an anonymous email to the gala organizer, a neat, plausible note suggesting a pre-show interview with Ryan, where he might be asked about his commitments and partnerships. The organizer, flattered and busy, forwarded the idea. Ryan, nervous and grateful for the perceived opportunity, agreed. He was primed to speak, to impress. I had primed the stage. Next, I arranged for a printed program to be misdelivered to the VIP table where Emily would sit. Inside, among the sponsors and schedules, I'd had a small insert placed, a QR code. When scanned, it led not to glamour shots or sponsor info, but to a private gallery I had cultivated, a collage of messages, timestamps, photos, and voice notes that mapped the affair. The gallery was assembled from what they are not allowed to exist in the open. A photo of Ryan S. Hoodie at the gym, a screenshot of Emily's unforgettable text, an audio clip of laughter that didn't belong to me. I didn't fabricate anything. I only presented the mosaic in a place where, once seen, it would spread. The QR code circulated among the table like a contagion. One person scanned it with curiosity, another with a polite smile. Then someone nudged Emily, who laughed at first. Dismissal is the natural defense when you haven't tight yet connected the mosaic AS pieces. And then someone else scanned it and showed Ryan, who excused himself to take a call. The air began to change. Conversations become brittle. Eyes shifted. What I had not counted on was how quickly social currency moves. Within 10 minutes, a murmured exchange became a cluster of people huddled near the bar, phones held like torches. Ryan returned to the stage, voice steady at first, but when a hand in the audience cleared its throat and someone asked, "Is everything okay?" the fake polish cracked. The questions came like tiny knives, some accusatory, some bewildered. He stammered. He lied. He didn't have the composure I had seen 1,000 times. He was human, exposed. Emily's collapse was quieter, but more absolute. She stepped outside into the cold gutter light and sobbed in a way I had only heard once. When a father mourned at a funeral, friends gathered, hands patting uselessly on shoulders. People I'd influenced months before, the ones who'd started to doubt, now looked at her and whispered with a satisfaction I felt like bile rising in my throat. People traded glances as if confirming a rumor and then turning it into a verdict. The gallery I had crafted did not need me to scream. It spoke in pixels and timestamps. It was evidence presented with the dispassion of a prosecutor. Then came the final blow. The legal ripple I had seeded weeks prior. A whispered complaint I'd encouraged to the freelance client. A small audit flagged by a well-placed phone call. That client, present at the gala, casually mentioned a suspicious invoice that bore Ryan's name. The phrase hung in the air. Eyes darted from Ryan to the program. Trust evaporated. Someone suggested a pause. The gala's host host murmured that perhaps the evening should be rescheduled. Sponsors shifted uneasily. Ryan's professional skin, the one he'd nurtured so diligently, flapped in the wind. It wasn't violence, not in the cinematic sense. It was public unraveling. It was the most human humiliation, watching everything you've built be reinterpreted through a new lens, then having people you thought were allies nod slowly as if they always suspected. He attempted explanations, stuttered denials, then swallowed the words when he saw their faces. Emily's friends turned away. Ryan's colleagues checked their phones. The crowd, which had gathered for admiration, now convened around a spectacle of ruin. I stood at the back of the room, watching my architecture of small cruelties perform the work I'd designed for them. The sight did not make me lighter. If anything, the air seemed thicker, like smoke after a fire. I learned something important in those minutes. Revenge accomplishes its aim, but it does not heal. It hollows. They left the gala that night like two strangers stepping off opposite ends of a train station platform, close in distance, but irrevocably apart. Ryan's career would not die instantly. Reputational damage grows like mold, slow and insidious. Emily's social circle contracted. Their house, already full of small irritants, found new fissures. I had exposed them, stripped their comfortable narrative, and put the pieces on public display. The fallout would expand beyond the night, infecting friends, jobs, and quiet mornings. What surprised me most was the aftermath inside myself. I had imagined triumph, a cold smile, a sense of justice served. Instead, I felt a dizzying emptiness. The victory was odious, both for me and because it didn't bring her back, didn't mend the years Ryan and I had shared. I had set into motion a machine that would grind away at them for months to come, and I could not stop its teeth from biting. Their suffering would feed my peace for a time, but peace is not the same as solace. I walked away from the gala alone. The city was indifferent. Lights smeared like watercolor tears. I had won, if winning meant exposing them, but in the echo of applause turned into whispers, a new thought settled. Some paybacks teach, some only wound. I had taught lessons that would echo. I had also lost something I didn't know I still had, the capacity for simple, uncomplicated faith in people. The silence after chaos is never what you imagine. You think it will feel like victory, like the ringing applause at the end of a long fight, but silence is heavier. It presses down, suffocates, and leaves you alone with the sound of your own breathing. The morning after the trial, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the same coffee mug I used every day when my life was simple, before betrayal, before revenge. The mug hadn't changed, but I had. The papers were still on the counter, headlines screaming about corruption, betrayal, the fall from grace of a once respected lawyer and his lover. Their photos plastered everywhere, faces blurred by shame. To the world, they were villains finally unmasked. To me, they were just ghosts that wouldn't stop haunting. For weeks, I thought the day they were destroyed would be the day I'd feel alive again, but instead, I felt hollow, like I had been running a marathon, only to find the finish line was a cliff. I went outside, and the world looked the same. The neighbors' kids played football in the yard. Someone was grilling. The air smelled like ordinary life, but I wasn't ordinary anymore. There was no going back. At night, sleep refused to come. When I closed my eyes, I didn't see their downfall. I saw her smile, his laughter, the way they looked at me before I knew. Those memories cut sharper than knives. Revenge had silenced them in the real world, but inside me, their echoes grew louder. People whispered now when I walked by. Some admired what I'd done in secret, the way I had beaten the system. Others looked at me like I was a monster who had orchestrated lives into ruins. Both were right. I caught my reflection in the mirror one night, and for the first time, I didn't recognize myself. My eyes weren't the same. They carried something darker, something permanent, the kind of shadow you don't wash off. Friends stopped calling. My phone barely buzzed anymore. Maybe they feared me, or maybe they just saw the emptiness and didn't know what to say. Either way, revenge had left me victorious, but alone. There were moments, fleeting ones, where pride flickered, where I'd think they'll never hurt me again. They got what they deserved, but the pride never lasted. It always gave way to silence, to questions that clawed at my chest. Did I win? Or did I simply trade one kind of prison for another? The truth is, revenge doesn't end when the enemy falls. It lingers, it festers, it becomes part of you. And as I stared out my window at the night sky, I realized something brutal. Justice had been served, but my soul would never be free. I had destroyed them, but in the process, I had destroyed myself too. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but no one warns you how bitter it tastes when it's finally swallowed. Weeks turned into months, and the world moved on. Their scandal was replaced by fresher news, another betrayal, another fall from grace. For most people, it became a forgotten forgotten headline. For me, it never ended. I thought the punishment I delivered would be the full stop to our story. But stories don't end that neatly. They keep twisting, bleeding into your nights, reshaping your soul in ways you never wanted. One evening, I received a letter. No stamp, no return address. Just slid under my door like a shadow. My heart clenched as I unfolded it. The handwriting was hers. You think you won, but you only exposed what we already were. You broke us, yes, but you also broke yourself. Tell me, when you look in the mirror now, who do you see? A victim, a hero, or just another liar who lives in the ruins of trust? No threats, no apologies, just venom disguised as truth. And the worst part? I couldn't shake her words. She was right. I had become something unrecognizable. Revenge hadn't restored me. It had transformed me into a mirror of the betrayal I despised. I sat in the dark with that letter for hours. My chest tightened with a realization I couldn't ignore. Revenge doesn't heal. It doesn't erase betrayal. It only digs the wound deeper until you mistake the pain for purpose. That night, I burned the letter, watched the flames curl the paper into ash, but the words didn't burn. They stayed etched in me, like scars under the skin. People think the scariest thing about betrayal is losing someone you love. They're wrong. The scariest thing is losing yourself in the fire you light to burn them down. So here I am, alive, victorious, and utterly hollow. My enemies ruined. My heart in ruins too. If there's a moral to this confession, it's this. Be careful what kind of justice you seek. Sometimes revenge doesn't make you whole. Sometimes it just makes you like them. And when that happens, you realize the real betrayal was not what they did to you. It's what you let it turn you into.